What's up, everybody? Today I'm going to be taking a look at the 6900 XT and comparing it to the 6800 XT clock for clock. Now, for today's video, I'm going to be using the reference design, Power Color 6900 XT, and a Asus TUF OC 6800 XT. Now, with graphics card pricing, 6800 XT prices are now more than what you could originally get a 6900 XT for in a lot of cases. So the point of today's video is just to try and see, like, are you better off going with the 6800 XT and trying to overclock it, or would you be better off with a 6900 XT? Now, I don't know if any partners or AMD themselves are binning these GPUs for their higher end models versus the entry level ones. But in my findings, this particular 6900 XT was a really good overclocker. I was able to set a 2.77 gigahertz clock within Wattman, whereas my 6800 XT I was only able to do 2560. So I did find that on average with the overclock supplied that the 6900 XT was about 15% faster, and you can check that out in some of my other videos. But for today's purposes, I want to know, is that 15% difference due to the clock speed difference, or is it a physical hardware advantage? Now, looking at the raw specs, both of these are based on the RDNA 2 architecture and use the same exact core design, with some of those cores partially disabled on the 6900 XT. Both cards feature the exact same 16 gigabytes of GDDR6, clocked at the same frequency over a 256-bit bus, providing a 512 gigabyte per second memory bandwidth, which is exactly the same as the Fury X from several years back. We know from other benchmarks that the 6900 XT is a few percent faster than the 6800 XT with both cards stock, but when I was overclocking, I personally found that the 6900 XT was a lot more power limited than the 6800 XT. So for today's video, I wanted to eliminate any variables other than the core count itself from affecting the performance of these cards. So I raised the power limit to 330 watts base with the 15% multiplier. That gives us 380 watts to play with on both cards, which in my testing is more than sufficient. And I set both cards to the same exact clock speed in Wattman. So both of these were set to 2560 on the core and then 2120 for the memory, because that's all the 6800 XT would do. Now, one aspect of this that's also important to look at is even though you set the clock speeds to a certain number in Wattman, it doesn't mean the card will actually hit those values. There's other factors at play, such as power, which has already been taken care of in MPT, and then also temperature plays a big role in the boosting algorithm. So to make sure this was a fair comparison, I ran 3D Mark Firestrike on both of these cards, and I also set the fan speed to maximum for both of these. Now, if you saw my TUF review, you'll see that I found that at max fan speed, the reference cooler actually performed a little bit better. But for the sake of this video, both of these cards were within 2 megahertz average clock speed for Firestrike. And with the more power tool, these clocks were also rock solid, so I believe we have a fair comparison here. Looking at the games, I'm going to be testing 4K and 1440p simply because at 1080p I feel that there's too much of a CPU bottleneck, and that's going to bring these cards closer together in terms of performance, and I want to look at what the actual performance delta is, assuming no other limiting factors. Now, I've mixed in some older and newer games. I just want to test a variety of engines and various APIs to see if that impacts scaling at all. And one more thing before we get into the benchmarks, I've actually included some crossfire results here for 3D Mark Time Spy. Now, unfortunately, there's not enough games that currently support this to warrant a dedicated video, but MGPU users will be pleased to know that AMD is still allowing you to pair different GPUs. So you can configure a 6900 XT and 6800 XT in an MGPU configuration. But with that being said, let's see those charts. All right, Now, looking at the specs of these two cards, assuming linear performance, we should see about 11% advantage to the 6900 XT. Now, oftentimes that isn't the case, especially as you get into these higher core count GPUs. It would be pretty interesting to add the 6800 in here, the non-XT version, just to see how scaling varies between that card and these two here. But on average here at 4K, we were looking at about a 6.5% performance advantage for the 6900 XT. With some games such as Tomb Raider 2013 really standing out at about 11% faster, and then other games on the low end, looking at Far Cry 5, were only just over a single percent faster. So there certainly is a good amount of variance depending on the game title being tested, and if we move on to the 1440p results, that number shrinks even lower. One thing that I did want to point out that I thought was interesting is that with ray tracing enabled, the 6900 XT does seem to show a bit more of an advantage. But there wasn't really enough titles tested here to draw any significant conclusions from that. So at the end of this, I guess the question is, how much can you find a 6800 XT for, and can you get a 6900 XT for cheaper? I think that has to be, in my opinion, the ultimate deciding factor. If you game at 4K, there is a little bit more advantage for 6900 XT, but assuming the Silicon Lottery is in your favor, you can get 6900 XT performance out of a 6800 XT. And then obviously for those looking for the absolute best from Team Red, the 6900 XT is definitely your clear option. So I hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and thanks for watching.